I will address the Moses issue to the lost boys and girls.
Let's talk about the Exodus itself. Moses frees the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, and then they travel to Mount Sinai and wander the wilderness for 40 years. Is there any textual or archaeological evidence that you know of for those things outside of the biblical texts?
There's not only no textual or archaeological evidence that I know of, there is no textual or archaeological evidence for it.
Did Moses exist? Do you think the Moses story, especially Exodus, maybe wilderness wandering, I wonder if that's completely fictitious in my thinking, but
Moses himself, there's no evidence for him being a historical figure, like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of that. It's all made up. Was there an exodus from Egypt? No, there wasn't an exodus. So once you start doing that, then you have to start doubting the credibility of all the other claims that the Bible makes. And that's why people get annoyed, because for some reason, people like to think that the Bible's true.
We have proof that the Red Sea crossing happened. Like proof, not just artifacts on the bottom. We had those. We had chariot wheels on the bottom of the Red Sea. We had all these cool little artifacts. But the coolest thing that I saw is the shoreline. If you've ever watched the Ten Commandments movie, they had that big pillar of fire that came down. That's mentioned in the Bible. This pillar of fire, I just pictured these flames coming down. But when you go to that shoreline where it's documented to happen, the entire shoreline is melted sand. And it takes about 3,000 degrees or more to melt that sand. And it's evenly melted. You can almost see like footprints. There's stones infused in this melted sand. This is amazing. You don't hear about it. If it was a proof of evolution, it would be in every single textbook. But it's a proof that there was an Exodus.
The Exodus narrative, which has always been, where's the proof? There's actually a tremendous amount of information.
Matching Joseph and the early Israelites' arrival in Egypt, their tremendous multiplication, their descent into slavery, the judgment and collapse of Egypt, the deliverance and exodus of the Semitic population, and finally in Canaan, evidence matching the conquest of the Promised Land.
Out there. And most interestingly enough, is dealing with someone I met a number of years ago, whose name is Brad Sparks. So he's done more research on this topic of the Exodus than I think anyone else in human history. And he's found incredible stuff, direct evidence on the walls of the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, showing graphic depictions, these are by the Egyptians, on these tombs, of the splitting of the sea and the Jews crossing and the water coming over. And when I first saw it, I didn't believe it. It was like just too good to be true. And when I looked into it, it is true. It's right there. It's always been there and no one's ever seen it. So here's people saying, there's no proof, it's such an amazing story, how come we don't find anything about it? And boom, there's always been something about it, we just never saw it. Most people are just ignoring it.
Scholars have recognized that the design of the chariot wheel can be used to identify specific periods in Egyptian history. In the waters of Aqaba, it appears that remnants of 4- and 6-spoke wheels have been discovered. These designs were used simultaneously only during Egypt's 18th dynasty and no later than about 1400 BC, a time frame that coincides closely to the biblical date of the Exodus.
1988, we traveled the Exodus route from the tip of the Sinai Peninsula into Saudi Arabia, using the Bible and satellite imagery to find the actual route. Inland, 33 kilometers, we found the bitter springs of Marah, as mentioned in Exodus 15. This dirt sample from the springs has been chemically analyzed and was found to contain excessive iron and dissolved salts, making it very bitter. Continuing along the route, we came to the clear water springs mentioned in Exodus 15:27. Here, caves were being excavated by Saudi archaeologists. They said they had found writings in these caves indicating that Moses had come through this area, and that the tombs of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, and Zipporah, the wife of Moses, were found in these caves.
Important archaeological evidence was discovered at Jabal al-Lawz, which further supports the biblical account. We found the stone boundary markers for keeping the Israelites off the mountain. But most startling, we found an 8-foot petroglyph of the Egyptian Apis bull god, and a campground large enough and with enough water for the entire Exodus tribe.
To our amazement, we found the top of the mountain to be black, as if the rocks had been burnt, possibly confirming the biblical scripture that the Lord descended upon it in fire and smoke.
Which is quite amazing. It's called the Brooklyn Papyrus. And this actually is a list of domestic servants from one estate.
we have maybe up to 100 people listed as slaves in Egypt. When we look at those names, 70% of them are Semitic names. And you can literally pick up Israelite names in there. Menachem, Issachar, and Asher, the names of 2 other tribes of Israel. Shifra, one of the Hebrew midwives in the Exodus story, a name that appears in this document.
Anakhipururao could have been the throne name of Prince Thutmose, who was allegedly Akhenaten's brother and was supposed to rule before or after Akhenaten, but never got to.
There are numerous theories regarding Akhenaten's mysterious brother, Thutmose. But the most profound comes from an unexpected source, Sigmund Freud, who in addition to being the founder of psychoanalysis, was also a scholar of Judaism and ancient Egypt.
Sigmund Freud, the famous psychoanalyst, in 1939 first suggested that monotheism began with Akhenaten, and he thought that someone in Akhenaten's court, perhaps his brother Thutmosis, could in fact be the historical Moses.
According to Freud, the events depicted in the Bible surrounding Moses' birth, exile, and most importantly his introduction of monotheism, perfectly coincide with the historical record of Thutmose.
It's controversial because when you do take a historical approach, so look at the archaeological evidence for events or people described in the Bible, it's very hard to find corroborating evidence to support the biblical claims about the past. So once you start saying, did this actually happen or not? So was Jonah swallowed by a big fish? Obviously, no, he wasn't swallowed by a big fish.
No. No.
For some reason, people like to think that the Bible's true.
Atheism is rubbish. A philosophy created by philosophers. I'm tempted to write a book called Atheist Faith. You big dummy. Here we have our atheist national anthem.
Welcome to Atheist Faith, where we believe that nothing made everything. The belief that there was nothing and nothing happened to nothing and then nothing magically exploded for no reason, creating everything and then a bunch of everything magically rearranged itself for no reason whatsoever into self-replicating bits which then turned into dinosaurs.